The room fell silent when Senator Chris Coons leaned into the microphone and pressed the secretary with a deceptively simple question: was a full-year continuing resolution bad for the Pentagon? It should have been the easiest answer in the world. Yet the way the exchange unfolded made it clear this wasn't just about accounting or paperwork. It was a battle over America's strength, its alliances, and its very place in a world growing more dangerous by the day. Coons wasn't interested in excuses. He wanted a commitment that the Pentagon wouldn't limp along on stopgap funding, because as he pointed out, continuing resolutions handcuff military planning, weaken buying power, and undermine the kind of investments that allow the United States to stand tall against adversaries.
Senator, we are committed to working with you to make sure the Defense Department gets as robust a budget as possible where we can meet the threats of today and tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll just say at the outset for all my colleagues, I am increasingly concerned that there is a threat that some believe they can best govern by continuing resolution, reconciliation, and rescission, and not ever actually have us appropriate. So I look forward to working with you to avoid that outcome, which I think would both disregard the role of Congress and put all of us at greater risk. It seems to me clear with regards to Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has no serious intent of negotiating. He continues to attack civilian targets night after night with hundreds and hundreds of drones. The Ukrainians have just carried out a spectacular attack against military targets. And it seems to me concerning that the 2026 request eliminates aid to Ukraine entirely. At the same time, the Senate has a strongly bipartisan bill led by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal to impose more sanctions on Russia, and many senators of both parties want to provide more aid to Ukraine. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, that the United States should use every tool it has at its disposal, including additional sanctions, to pressure Russia to come to the table to negotiate a just and lasting peace for the war in Ukraine?
Senator, every tool at our disposal? No. We have a lot of tools in a lot of places.
Let me be more narrow. Let me be more narrow then.
Apply.
You said, and I'll take some exception to this, that our European allies cannot freeload off the United States in perpetuity. My impression is that Article 5 of the NATO treaty was only invoked once. It was after 9/11. And a significant number of our European allies and partners deployed to Afghanistan alongside us and suffered significant combat casualties. In the first 2 years of the war in Ukraine, a war of Russian aggression, 50 other countries stepped forward, deployed military support, delivered materiel, provided financial and operating support, and at regular meetings of the Defense Contact Group, your predecessor led that process of deploying military assistance. What message do you think it sends? That as Ukraine continues to suffer day after day of punishing attacks on civilian centers, we're not using the $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority that remains to send additional air defense and interceptors, and you yourself chose to not attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Mr. Secretary, why not use the already appropriated presidential drawdown authority to deliver defense material badly needed by Ukraine?
Well, Senator, as you know, the presidential drawdown authorities 71 through 74 still apply, and they are still flowing. There's some in reserve. To your question about my statement, and I served with a lot of NATO allies in Afghanistan as well. Incredibly capable Canadians, Brits, and Australians and others. And grateful for them. And I've gotten to know a lot of them in this process going to Brussels. Amazing people, amazing countries.
Thus, I was struck, Mr. Secretary.
But we also wore a patch on our shoulder that said ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. And you know what the joke was? That it stood for I Saw Americans Fighting. Because what ultimately was a lot of flags, was not a lot of on-the-ground capability. You're not a real coalition, you're not a real alliance, unless you have real defense capability and real armies that can bring those to bear. And that's a reality that Europe is waking up to quickly, and we're glad, because they're our friends, and we want them to be safe and free and secure. And sometimes that takes true talk and tough love, and they've responded very well to that because we want them to succeed. And
Mr. Secretary, let's just make clear for the record that our military partners in Afghanistan included many who served and died. Our Danish partners and allies on a per capita basis
Don't try to
suffered
make it
more.
look like I don't care about the investments of our partners. Of course I do.
Mr.
I recognize
Secretary,
that there were lives lost from other countries.
Of
but
course
the
there
bulk
were.
of the effort was Americans. And an alliance needs to include other countries and be more
And
balanced
Mr.
to be a
Secretary,
real alliance. And
as I
that's the point
pointed
we're
out
making.
in my opening comments, our partners and allies have stepped up, have invested, have engaged in the defense of Ukraine, and so should we.
His challenge set the tone. Half measures are no substitute for long-term strength, but that was just the beginning. What came next was the moment everyone in the room realized this hearing was going to be about far more than spreadsheets. Coons pivoted to Ukraine, raising alarms that the administration's 2026 request cut aid to Kyiv entirely. At the very moment Vladimir Putin's forces were raining down drones and missiles on civilians, Washington was sending signals of retreat. Coons made the stakes unmistakable. If the United States steps back, Ukraine loses leverage, Russia gains confidence, and every ally watching starts to doubt whether America's promises are worth anything at all. He reminded the chamber that hundreds of Russian attacks on civilian targets showed Putin had no intention of negotiating in good faith, and with Ukraine still managing spectacular strikes of its own, the only thing that kept Moscow from pressing harder was the steady support from the West. Pull that away, Coons warned, and Kyiv would be left bargaining from weakness while Putin smiled at the collapse of international resolve. The senator didn't let the moment pass without drilling into the core of the issue. He asked the secretary flatly, shouldn't the United States use every tool at its disposal to pressure Russia? That meant not just words but sanctions, weapons shipments, and economic pressure designed to squeeze Moscow until peace became the only option left. The answer he received was hedged and cautious. Every tool at our disposal, no. The pause that followed was deafening. Coons seized on it immediately, framing the refusal as proof of a deeper problem. Without the full weight of sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic leverage, peace wasn't peace at all. It was surrender dressed up as compromise. And if Washington took that path, the world would see the U.S. as a power unwilling to back its own words. But Coons wasn't finished. He turned sharply to NATO, taking aim at the creeping isolationism that had begun to color Washington debates. Some in the room had suggested that Europe couldn't rely on the United States forever, that allies were freeloading on American power. Coons came armed with history to crush that narrative. He reminded everyone that NATO's Article 5, the heart of the alliance, had been invoked only once, and it wasn't for Europe's benefit. It was after 9/11 when European allies deployed alongside American troops in Afghanistan. They bled, they died, and they carried the burdens of war shoulder to shoulder with U.S. forces. In Ukraine the same was true. More than 50 nations had stepped forward with military support, financial aid, and direct assistance, proof that the transatlantic relationship was not a one-way street. Coons' message was clear: dismissing allies as freeloaders wasn't just false, it was dangerous. Then came the clash that left jaws tight across the chamber. Coons hammered the secretary over the decision not to use $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority that had already been appropriated. Money that could have rushed desperately needed air defense and interceptors into Ukraine was instead left idle. To Coons, this wasn't bureaucratic delay. It was a moral and strategic failure, one that emboldened Moscow, endangered civilians, and undermined the credibility of America's security commitments. In that moment, the contrast between urgency and complacency couldn't have been sharper. While Ukrainians huddled in shelters against missile barrages, Washington was sitting on billions of dollars that could have made a difference, and Coons wanted the world to hear it. The secretary pushed back, pointing to past contributions from allies, and joking that NATO's ISAF mission in Afghanistan had earned the nickname "I Saw Americans Fighting." It was meant as a reminder of U.S. sacrifices, but it landed like an insult. Coons shot back immediately, slicing through the quip with hard reality. Yes, America carried the heaviest burden, but alliances aren't built on sarcasm. They are built on shared sacrifice, and dismissing allies with jokes only eroded the trust and unity needed to stand against authoritarian aggression. His retort echoed beyond the chamber. Without real armies, modern capabilities, and political will, a coalition collapses into nothing more than empty flags and photo ops. Yet Coons didn't let the exchange spiral into bitterness. Instead, he reframed the debate around values. He acknowledged that yes, Europe must do more, must invest more, must bring real capabilities to the table. But he also reminded the Secretary that Americans value their allies, that nations like Denmark, Canada, and Britain had lost lives alongside U.S. troops. He made it clear that America's friendships weren't just transactional deals to be measured in dollars and percentages, they were bonds forged in blood and sacrifice. And in Ukraine those bonds were once again being tested. As the hearing neared its end, Coons delivered his sharpest warning. Pursuing a ceasefire at any cost wasn't peace. It was a pause that rewarded Putin's aggression and paved the way for the next war. Real peace, he argued, came only through strength, strength that meant continued support for Ukraine, a stronger NATO, and a clear message that aggression would never be rewarded. Anything less would shred the credibility of America's security guarantees and invite chaos worldwide. The weight of his words hung in the air. This was no longer a policy seminar or budget hearing. It was a fight over America's identity. Would the United States retreat into isolation and leave its allies exposed? Or would it double down, proving once again that its word is iron, and its strength unmatched? Coons made his choice clear, and by the time he finished, the entire room understood that the real question wasn't about appropriations or resolutions. It was about whether America still had the resolve to lead. So what do you think? Was Senator Coons right to call out complacency and demand full commitment, or is the U.S. carrying too much of the world's burdens already? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown compelling, hit that subscribe button, because the next hearing might be even more controversial, and we'll be here to break it all down for you.